The emergency lights flickered red inside the crashed escape pod as Commander Marcus Cole pulled himself from the wreckage with bloody hands and a determination that refused to die. His ship, the diplomatic vessel Horizon's Edge, was nothing but scattered debris floating somewhere in orbit above this unknown world. Torn apart by pirate raiders who had ambushed them near the Outer Rim territories, 47 crew members had served under his command. And now Marcus was the only one left breathing. He coughed blood onto the alien soil and forced himself to stand despite the searing pain in his ribs. At least 3 of them broken from the crash landing. The sky above was a strange shade of purple mixed with gold, and twin suns hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across a landscape of crystalline forests and towering structures that looked like a blend of organic growth and advanced technology. Well, Marcus muttered to himself as he activated his emergency beacon. At least the air is breathable. He had maybe 3 days of rations in his survival pack. A standard-issue plasma pistol with half a charge remaining. And absolutely no idea where in the galaxy he had ended up. The navigation computer had been destroyed in the attack, and his escape pod had drifted through an uncharted jump point before crashing here. Marcus limped toward a rock formation that would provide some shelter and began setting up a basic camp while his beacon pulsed its distress signal into the void. He did not expect rescue. Not really. Not out here in unexplored space where humanity had never ventured before. But Marcus Cole was not a man who gave up easily, and he would survive as long as his body allowed him to. 3 hours passed before he heard them coming. The sound was strange, a clicking and chittering that seemed to come from multiple directions at once, accompanied by the rustle of movement through the crystal trees. Marcus grabbed his pistol and pressed his back against the rock, his heart pounding despite his efforts to remain calm. They emerged from the forest like ghosts made solid, and Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat at the sight of them. The creatures stood nearly 7 feet tall, with bodies that seemed both insectoid and humanoid at the same time. Their skin, a shimmering blue-black carapace that caught the light of the twin suns like polished armor. They had 4 arms each, 2 larger ones and 2 smaller manipulator limbs near their chests. And their faces were angular, with large multifaceted eyes that sparkled with obvious intelligence. There were 6 of them, and they carried weapons that hummed with energy as they surrounded his position. Marcus knew he had no chance of fighting his way out, and he was too injured to run, even if there was somewhere to run to. So he did the only thing that made sense to a man who had spent 20 years as a military officer and diplomat. He holstered his weapon, raised his empty hands, and stepped out to meet them. The aliens froze, their clicking language intensifying as they studied him with what he could only interpret as surprise. One of them, larger than the others and wearing ornate armor decorated with golden symbols, stepped forward and made a gesture that was clearly a command. Marcus felt something cold press against his neck. And then the world went dark when he woke. He was no longer on the forest floor, but inside a structure of sweeping arches and bioluminescent walls that pulsed with soft light. His wounds had been treated, his ribs wrapped in some kind of healing membrane that had already reduced the pain to a dull ache. He sat up slowly and found himself in a chamber that was clearly meant to hold prisoners, though it was far more comfortable than any cell he had ever seen. A force field shimmered across the only exit, and beyond it he could see guards standing at attention. Hours passed, or maybe days. Marcus had no way of knowing. They brought him food that was strange but edible, and water that tasted faintly of minerals but satisfied his thirst. No one spoke to him or attempted communication. They simply watched with those glittering compound eyes and waited finally on what Marcus guessed was the 3rd day. The force field dropped, and a contingent of armored guards entered his cell. They gestured for him to follow, and Marcus obeyed without resistance. The corridors of the alien structure were vast and filled with beings of the same species, all of them stopping to stare at the strange creature being led through their midst. Marcus kept his head high and his shoulders straight. He would not show fear to these beings, no matter what fate awaited him. They brought him to a chamber so large that it took his breath away. A throne room carved from living crystal that caught the light and scattered it into a million rainbow fragments. Hundreds of the alien beings lined the walls, their clicking whispers filling the air like the sound of a distant storm. And at the far end of the chamber, seated upon a throne that seemed to grow from the floor itself, was the most magnificent being Marcus had ever seen. She was clearly female, her form more elegant than the warriors who had captured him, with flowing robes of silver and gold that seemed to move on their own. Her carapace was a deeper shade of blue than the others, almost black, and her eyes held a depth of intelligence and age that made Marcus feel very small and very young. A crown of crystalline spires rose from her head, and when she moved, the entire chamber fell silent. This was their queen, Marcus realized, and she was studying him with an intensity that made him feel like a specimen under a microscope. The guards forced him to his knees before the throne, but Marcus refused to lower his gaze. He stared up at the queen with all the defiance he could muster. Bloodied and broken but unafraid, the queen tilted her head, and something that might have been amusement flickered across her alien features. She rose from her throne and descended the crystal steps until she stood directly before him, so close that he could see the subtle patterns in her carapace and the ancient wisdom in her multifaceted eyes. The chamber held its breath, and then the queen spoke, her voice emerging from a translation device at her throat, imperfect, if slightly mechanical. English. You do not kneel properly, human, and you meet my gaze without permission. Your species is either very brave or very foolish. Marcus managed to smile despite the pain in his ribs. Maybe we are a little bit of both. Your Majesty. The queen studied him for a long moment, and then she did something that sent shocked whispers rippling through the assembled court. She laughed. It was a strange sound, clicking and musical at the same time, but it was unmistakably laughter. She waved her hand, and the guards retreated, leaving Marcus alone with the queen in a circle of empty space. She leaned down until her face was close to his, those ancient eyes boring into his soul. I have watched your kind from afar for many cycles. Human, I had dismissed you as primitive creatures barely worth observing. But you are different. She straightened and circled him slowly, her robes trailing across the crystal floor. You survived a crash that should have killed you. You faced my warriors without fear. And now you kneel before the ruler of 13 worlds with defiance in your eyes. She stopped before him and tilted her head again in that curious way. Tell me, human who refuses to be afraid, what is your designation? Commander Marcus Cole, Diplomatic Corps. United Earth Alliance Marcus Cole, she repeated, tasting the words. I am Cyraxis, Queen of the Volanthi, and I have not found anything interesting in 300 of your years. She reached down and lifted his chin with one of her smaller manipulator limbs, forcing him to meet her gaze directly. So tell me, Marcus Cole, and answer honestly, for I will know if you lie. Her eyes glittered with something that made his heart skip a beat. Are you single, human? Marcus stared at the queen in complete silence for what felt like an eternity, his brain struggling to process what she had just asked him. Of all the questions he had expected from an alien ruler, that one had not even made the list. What? He finally managed to say, his diplomatic training failing him entirely. Queen. Cyraxis made that clicking laugh again and withdrew her hand from his chin. Your confusion is amusing. Human. Perhaps your translation device is malfunctioning? No, I heard you perfectly. Is that really what you wanted to ask me? The queen gestured, and servants rushed forward with a chair that they placed behind Marcus. Sit. You are injured. and I do not enjoy speaking to the top of your head. We have much to discuss. Marcus rose from his knees with a wince and settled into the chair, which was surprisingly comfortable, despite being designed for beings with a very different body shape. The queen returned to her throne but did not sit, instead pacing before it with a grace that seemed impossible for a creature with a rigid exoskeleton. You did not answer my question. Marcus Cole. Yes, I am single, Marcus replied, still utterly confused. My work keeps me traveling too much for relationships. But why does that matter to you? Cyraxis stopped pacing and fixed him with those ancient, glittering eyes. Because I have a proposition for you, human. One that may save both of our species. She clapped her hands, and the chamber began to empty as courtiers and guards filed out through hidden doors within minutes. Only Marcus and the queen remained in the vast throne room. What I am about to tell you is known only to the highest members of my court, Cyraxis said, her mechanical voice carrying a weight of sorrow that surprised Marcus. The Volanti are dying, human. My people face extinction within the next 10 generations. Marcus leaned forward, his diplomatic instincts kicking in despite the strangeness of the situation. How is that possible? Your civilization seems incredibly advanced. We are advanced. We have conquered star systems and built wonders that your species cannot even imagine. But all our technology cannot solve the curse that plagues us. She descended from the throne steps and moved to a crystalline panel on the wall, touching it to bring up holographic displays that Marcus could not read but could understand from the images alone, charts showing population decline, genetic sequences marked with warning symbols, and images of Volanti nurseries that held fewer and fewer eggs with each passing cycle. 3,000 of your years ago, a genetic plague swept through our people. It killed every male of our species within a single generation. Marcus felt his stomach drop at the implications. Every male? Then how do you? We adapted. We learned to reproduce through cloning, to perpetuate our species through technology rather than biology. But cloning is not true reproduction, Marcus Cole. She turned to face him, and for the first time he saw something behind the mask of regal composure. He saw fear. Each generation of clones is slightly weaker than the last, slightly less viable. We have slowed the decay through genetic manipulation, but we cannot stop it. In 10 more generations, there will be no more Volanti. Marcus sat in stunned silence, processing the magnitude of what she had just revealed. An entire civilization, masters of technology and conquerors of worlds, facing slow extinction with no way to stop it. Why are you telling me this? He asked quietly. I'm just a crash pilot from a species you barely know. Cyraxis moved closer until she stood directly before him again. Because my scientists have been studying your species from afar for many cycles. Your genetics are remarkably adaptable. You are compatible with more species than any other we have encountered. And you, Marcus Cole, according to the scans we performed while you slept. She paused, and Marcus could have sworn he saw something like hope in her alien eyes. You are exceptionally compatible with Volanti genetic structure, more so than any specimen we have ever analyzed. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face as the implications became clear. You want me to help you reproduce? I want you to consider becoming my mate, Cyraxis said bluntly. To help create a new generation of Volanti that carries the genetic diversity needed to end the slow death of my people. She held up a hand to forestall his response. I do not expect an answer now. You are injured and confused, and this is much to process. I am offering you time, human. Time to learn about my people and my world. Time to understand what I am truly asking of you. She returned to her throne and sat, suddenly looking every one of her 3,000 years old. I have lived a very long time, Marcus Cole. I have ruled with wisdom and strength, and I have watched my people slowly fade despite everything I have done. I have given up hope until my scouts brought you before me. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, his mind spinning with possibilities and implications. Even if I agreed, even if this was possible, what would that mean for me? For my people? It would mean an alliance between our species. It would mean sharing our technology with humanity, our medicine, our star charts, our protection against the threats that lurk in the dark spaces between worlds. She leaned forward on her throne, and it would mean that you would never be alone again. You would have a purpose beyond mere survival, a legacy that would echo through eternity. Marcus laughed, a sound of disbelief rather than humor. You are asking me to become your what? Your husband? Your breeding partner? I am asking you to become my equal, Cyrexis said with an intensity that silenced his laughter. The Volanthi do not mate as your species does. We do not form bonds based on mere biological imperative. A true mating among my people is a joining of minds and spirits, a partnership that transcends the physical. She stood again and descended from her throne once more. I have ruled alone for 3,000 years. Marcus Cole, I have had no equal, no one to challenge my thinking or share my burdens. I saw something in you when you stood before me, bloodied and broken but unafraid. I saw a spirit that matched my own. She stopped before him and extended one of her larger hands. Stay with me, learn about my people, and then decide. That is all I ask. Marcus looked at her hand, then at her face, then at the empty chamber around them. He thought about his crashed ship and his dead crew, about the beacon pulsing its hopeless signal into the void, about the life waiting for him back on Earth that suddenly seemed very small and very far away. He thought about the look in her eyes when she spoke of her dying people, the weight of 3,000 years of lonely rule, the desperate hope of a queen who had found something unexpected in the wreckage of a crashed escape pod. Marcus Cole reached out and took her hand. Okay, he said, I will stay and I will learn, but I make no promises beyond that. Cyrexis made that clicking sound that he was beginning to recognize as genuine amusement. You are the first being in a very long time to negotiate with me, Marcus Cole. Everyone else simply agrees to whatever I say. Then maybe you need someone who is not afraid to tell you when you are wrong. The queen tilted her head, and something shifted in her ancient eyes. Perhaps I do, human. Perhaps I do. She did not release his hand as she led him from the throne room, and Marcus could not help but notice that her grip was surprisingly gentle for a being who could probably crush bone without effort. He had come to this world expecting to die, and instead he had found something he could not yet name, something that terrified him and intrigued him in equal measure, something that felt dangerously like hope. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus Cole crashed on Volantos Prime, and in that time he had learned more about the Volanthi than humanity had discovered about any alien species in its entire history of space exploration. He had been given quarters in the Royal Palace, a suite of rooms that combined organic architecture with technology so advanced it seemed like magic. The walls themselves were alive, responding to his needs before he could even voice them, adjusting temperature and light, and even generating simple furniture when required. The queen visited him often, sometimes to answer his questions about her people, sometimes simply to talk. Marcus discovered that Cyrexis was not just ancient but truly brilliant, a mind that had spent 3 millennia learning and growing and adapting. She spoke 700 languages, had personally overseen the colonization of a dozen worlds, and had once spent an entire century studying the art and literature of extinct civilizations just because she found them interesting. She was also, Marcus realized with growing surprise, genuinely funny when she let her guard down. Her sense of humor was dry and cutting, and she seemed to delight in catching him off guard with observations that were both alien and somehow perfectly relatable. Your species puts great value on romantic love, she said one evening, as they walked through the crystal gardens beneath the twin moons. You form pair bonds based on emotion rather than logic or genetic compatibility. I find this fascinating and completely insane, Marcus laughed. Which he found himself doing more often around her. It does seem crazy when you put it that way. But love is not really about logic. It is about connection. About finding someone who makes the universe feel less empty. Cyraxis was quiet for a moment. Her multifaceted eyes reflecting the moonlight like 1,000 tiny stars. I have not felt that kind of connection in a very long time. Perhaps ever. 3,000 years of rule leaves little room for such things. That sounds lonely. It is, she admitted. And Marcus heard the truth in her mechanical voice. I had forgotten how lonely until you arrived, human. You make me remember what it was like to be young and curious and hopeful. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a messenger. A young Valanthi female who knelt before the queen with visible fear. Forgive the intrusion. Majesty, the Lord Curvath demands an audience. He claims it is a matter of grave importance. Cyraxis made a sound that Marcus had come to recognize as annoyance. Curvath can wait until morning. He has assembled the other Hive Lords. Majesty, they are in the Grand Chamber now. The Queen went very still, and Marcus felt a chill run down his spine at the sudden tension in her posture. Very well. I will attend, Marcus. Return to your quarters. I would rather come with you. This is Valanthi politics. It does not concern you. Marcus met her gaze steadily. If it concerns you, it concerns me. You said you wanted an equal. Well, equals do not hide in their rooms while trouble brews. Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or approval. Very well. Come and see what it means to rule a dying people. The Grand Chamber was filled with Valanthi nobles, all of them wearing the elaborate armor of the Hive Lords. At their head stood Curvath, a massive male who radiated hostility like a furnace radiates heat. Wait, Marcus thought? A male? He leaned towards Cyraxis and whispered, I thought all the males were dead. Curvath is a clone, as are all the lords. But he was created from preserved genetic material of the last great warrior king. He believes this makes him special. Curvath stepped forward as the queen took her throne, his compound eyes fixed on Marcus with obvious disgust. So the rumors are true. He announced loudly enough for the entire chamber to hear. Our queen has taken an alien pet, a primitive creature from a backwater species, and she parades him before the court like a trophy. Murmurs rippled through the assembled nobles, and Marcus saw that not all of them were pleased with Curvath's words. The human is my guest, Cyraxis said calmly, and you will address him with respect, Lord Curvath. Respect? Curvath made a clicking sound of contempt. I will not show respect to a creature whose species still fights wars over resources and beliefs. The humans are barely above animals, and yet you consider taking one as a mate? The chamber erupted in shocked whispers. How do you know about that? Cyraxis demanded, her voice suddenly cold. You think you can keep secrets from the Hive Lords, Majesty? We know about your desperate scheme to pollute our genetic heritage with alien blood. It is an abomination. A betrayal of everything the Valanthi have stood for. Curvath turned to address the other nobles. I call for a vote of no confidence. Queen Cyraxis has clearly lost her mind. She must be removed from the throne for the good of our people. You dare? Cyraxis rose from her throne, and Marcus felt the temperature in the room drop. I have ruled this empire since before your genetic template was first created. I have kept our people alive through crisis after crisis while you played at being warriors, and now you question my judgment? Your judgment brought an alien into our most sacred spaces, Curvath shot back. Your judgment would see our children born as half-breed abominations. I say your judgment can no longer be trusted. Marcus stepped forward before he could stop himself. May I speak? The chamber went silent. Every eye turning to the human who had dared to interrupt Curvath laughed. A harsh clicking sound, The pet wants to bark. How amusing. Speak then, creature. Let us hear what wisdom the primitive has to offer. Marcus ignored the insult and addressed the assembled nobles. I am new to your world and your politics, but I know something about dying civilizations. My people have faced extinction more than once, through war and disease and our own stupidity. And do you know what saved us every time? He paused, making sure he had their attention. Change. Adaptation, the willingness to do things differently when the old ways stopped working. You are cloning yourselves into oblivion, every generation weaker than the last. And Lord Curveth wants you to keep doing the same thing and hoping for a different result. He pointed at Cyrexis. Your queen is offering you a chance at survival. A chance to introduce new genetic material that could strengthen your species instead of watching it slowly fade. And you want to remove her for that? For trying to save you? Curvath advanced on Marcus with murder in his eyes. You know nothing of our ways. Human, I know that dead civilizations do not have ways. I know that pride is a poor substitute for survival. And I know that your queen has more wisdom in one of her smaller hands than you have in your entire oversized body. The insult hung in the air like a thunderclap. Curvath made a sound of pure rage and raised his fist. But before he could strike, Cyraxis was between them. You would attack my guest in my own throne room? She said quietly, but her voice carried enough menace to freeze Curvath in place. That is grounds for execution under our oldest laws. He insulted me. He spoke the truth, which you apparently cannot tell the difference between. She turned to address the other Hive Lords. Lord Curvath has called for a vote of no confidence. Very well, we shall have a vote, but first, by ancient law, I invoke the right of challenge. Gasps echoed through the chamber. I declare the human Marcus Cole as my official suitor. Cyraxis announced. He will undergo the 3 trials to prove his worth. If he succeeds, he will have earned the right to stand at my side, and no Hive Lord may gainsay it. If he fails, I will consider Lord Curvath's concerns. Curvath's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. The trials will kill him. No alien has ever survived the crucible pits, let alone the other challenges. Then you have nothing to worry about. Cyraxis replied smoothly after the court dispersed. Marcus found himself alone with the queen in her private chambers. You might have warned me before declaring me your official suitor, he said. Would you have refused? Marcus thought about it, about the look on Curvath's face, about the whispers of hope he had seen among some of the younger nobles, about the way Cyraxis had stepped between him and danger without hesitation. No, he admitted. I would not have refused. Then we have work to do. The first trial begins at dawn. And I will not lose you to that pompous fool's scheming. She reached out and touched his face with surprising gentleness. You defended me before my entire court. No one has ever done that. Someone should have done it a long time ago. Her eyes glittered in the bioluminescent light. Yes, they should have, that night. A human merchant vessel passed through the system and detected Marcus's emergency beacon. They sent a message offering rescue. A way home, a return to the life he had known before Marcus deleted the message without responding. The first trial was called the Crucible Pits, and it was exactly as terrifying as the name suggested. Marcus stood at the edge of a massive arena carved from black stone, looking down at a maze filled with creatures that defied description, multi-limbed predators with poison-tipped claws, swarms of flying insects with razor-sharp wings, and something that looked like a cross between a spider and a nightmare lurking in the shadows. The rules are simple, the trial master announced. Survive until the horn sounds. Any weapon you can find in the pit may be used. Any tactics are permitted. Marcus looked at Cyraxis, who watched from the royal viewing platform with an expression of forced calm. They had spent the hours before dawn discussing strategy. and she had given him one piece of advice that had seemed strange at the time. The Volanthi expect you to fight like a warrior, she had said. So do not fight like a warrior. Fight like a human. The horn sounded, and Marcus was pushed into the pit. He hit the ground running, ignoring the nearest creature in favor of sprinting toward a collapsed pillar that offered some cover behind him. He heard clicking and chittering as the predators registered his presence and began to hunt. Most Volanthi challengers would have stood their ground and fought, trusting in their natural armor and strength to see them through. Marcus had neither armor nor strength compared to these creatures, but he had something they lacked: a human brain, evolved for tool use and creative problem-solving. Found a length of metal debris and wedged it into a crack in the wall, creating a lever that loosened several large stones when the first predator came around the corner. Marcus pulled the lever and brought half the wall down on top of it. The crowd above went silent in surprise. Over the next hour, Marcus continued to fight dirty by Volanthi standards. He used the creatures against each other, leading them into conflicts while he slipped away in the confusion. He built traps from the debris scattered throughout the pit, creating snares and tripwires and a particularly nasty deadfall that crushed two of the flying swarms at once. He found a pool of stagnant water that held some kind of bioluminescent organism and used it to blind a creature that relied on light-sensitive eyes. When the final horn sounded, Marcus was bleeding from a dozen small wounds and exhausted beyond measure. But he was alive. The crowd erupted in a mixture of cheers and confused murmuring. No one had ever survived the crucible pits like that. No one had ever thought. Tokervath stood at the edge of the viewing platform with a look of disbelief that slowly transformed into cold fury. He cheated, the Hive Lord snarled. He used tricks and deception instead of honorable combat. There are no rules against tricks and deception, Cyraxis replied coolly. You yourself said any tactics are permitted. The human survived. He passes the first trial. The second trial took place 3 days later, after Marcus had recovered enough to stand without swaying. It was called the Paradox of the Last Brood, and it was a test of wisdom rather than strength. Marcus was brought to a chamber filled with holographic displays showing complex scenarios, each one a problem that had no clear solution. The test presents you with impossible choices, Cyraxis had explained. Situations where any decision leads to harm. The examiners judge not on what choice you make, but on how you make it. The first scenario showed 2 groups of Volanthi colonists, both facing destruction, with resources enough to save only one. Marcus studied the scenario carefully, noting details that others might have missed. What if we split the resources and use them to buy time for both groups while we search for additional options? He asked. The examiners looked at each other in confusion. That is not one of the available choices. You did not say I could only use the available choices. You said I had to solve the problem for 4 hours. Marcus worked through scenario after scenario, refusing to accept the limited options presented. He combined solutions in ways the test designers had never anticipated, created new possibilities by questioning the assumptions built into each problem. And when he truly could not find a better way, he explained his reasoning with honesty and humility. I would choose to save the scientists over the warriors, he said in one scenario. Not because their lives are worth more, but because their knowledge gives us the best chance of preventing this situation from happening again. When the trial ended, the examiners retired to deliberate for almost an entire day. They returned with expressions of amusement and announced that Marcus had passed. His solutions were unconventional, the chief examiner reported, but they demonstrated wisdom beyond what we expected from his species. He thinks in ways we do not. Curvath's fury grew with each passing trial, and Marcus began to notice something troubling. The Hive Lord was meeting in secret with other nobles, speaking in hushed tones that stopped whenever Marcus appeared. Cyraxis noticed it too. He is planning something, she said one evening. Curvath is not the type to accept defeat gracefully. What can you do? I have passed 2 trials, one more, and I will have earned my place. The 3rd trial is different, Cyrexis said quietly. It is called the test of devotion, and its nature is revealed only to the participant. I do not know what form it will take for you. The announcement came the next morning, delivered by a herald who seemed almost apologetic. The test of devotion for the human Marcus Cole has been determined by the Council of Elders. The herald proclaimed, as the purpose of the Union is to provide genetic salvation for the Volanthi people. The test shall be the successful harvesting of genetic material for breeding purposes. Marcus felt a chill at the formal words. What does that mean exactly? The herald hesitated before continuing. The harvesting process requires the use of the sacred extractor, a device that collects genetic material directly from the source. Without the medical technology that normally accompanies the procedure, the process is invariably fatal. The chamber erupted in shock, and Marcus saw Cyrexis go pale beneath her dark carapace. This is murder, she said, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage, disguised as tradition. The council has spoken, Curvath said, stepping forward with barely concealed satisfaction. If the human truly wishes to prove his devotion, he must be willing to sacrifice everything for the future of our people. Or he can admit that he is unworthy and leave. Marcus looked at Cyrexis, saw the horror in her ancient eyes, the guilt already forming as she realized what her declaration had set in motion. Turned to address the council. I accept the trial. Silence fell over the chamber. Marcus. No. Cyrexis whispered. You said the technology that normally accompanies the procedure could make it survivable? The herald nodded hesitantly. Yes, but that technology has been. The council has ruled that someone sabotaged it, Marcus said flatly. Someone made sure that this trial would be a death sentence. He looked directly at Curvath. Someone was very clever. The Hive Lord met his gaze without flinching. The trial is the trial. If you survive it, you will have proven yourself. If you do not, well, perhaps the Queen will finally see reason. That night, Cyrexis came to Marcus's quarters. She dismissed the guards and sealed the door behind her. And when she turned to face him, he saw something he had never seen before on her alien features. Tears. I never meant for this to happen, she said, her voice breaking. I thought I could protect you. I thought, this is not your fault. I am the Queen. Everything that happens in my domain is my fault. I declared you my suitor. I put you in this position. And now, she could not finish the sentence. Marcus crossed the room and took her hands in his. Cyrexis. Listen to me. I knew what I was getting into when I stayed. I knew there would be dangers. I chose this. You chose to help a dying people. You did not choose to die for them. Maybe I did. She looked at him with those ancient, tear-filled eyes. What are you saying? I am saying that I have spent my whole life looking for something worth dying for. A cause, a purpose, something bigger than myself. And I think I found it. He reached up and touched her face, marveling at the smooth warmth of her carapace. Your people deserve a chance to survive. And if my death can give them that, then it is not a bad way to go. Cyrexis pulled away, her expression shifting from grief to determination. I will not allow it. I will call off the trial, abdicate if I must. I will not let you die for a chance that may not even work. Cyrexis. No. Listen to me, human. I have lived for 3,000 years. I have watched everyone I cared about die. I have buried lovers and friends and children. And I thought I had lost the capacity to feel anything beyond duty. She moved close to him again. So close, he could feel the warmth radiating from her body. But then you crashed into my world with your stubborn defiance and your terrible jokes and your beautiful, fragile humanity. And you made me feel something I had forgotten existed. Her smaller manipulator hands reached up to cup his face. I will not bury you too, Marcus Cole. I refuse. Marcus smiled despite the weight of the moment. That is the first time you have just called me. Marcus, do not change the subject. I am not. I am glad. That is all. I am glad I got to mean something to you. Even if it was only for a little while. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that I do not regret any of it. Meeting you is the best thing that ever happened to me. Cyraxis made a sound that was half laugh and half sob. You are the most infuriating creature I have ever met. I know. The chamber of the sacred extractor was cold and clinical, a stark contrast to the organic warmth of the rest of the palace. Marcus lay on a crystal slab while Volanti technicians prepared the ancient device. Their movements hesitant, and their eyes filled with something that looked like shame. The extractor itself was a nightmare of tubes and needles and pulsing energy conduits. Designed in an era when the Volanti valued results over the comfort of those providing them, Cyraxis stood at the edge of the chamber, forbidden by tradition from approaching the slab, but refusing to leave entirely. Her eyes never left Marcus's face, and the connection between them felt almost physical despite the distance. Curvath watched from the observation gallery above, surrounded by his loyal hive lords. His expression one of barely contained triumph. Begin the procedure. The chief technician announced. Marcus felt the first needle enter his arm and closed his eyes. The pain was immediate and intense, spreading through his body like fire as the extractor began its work. He heard Cyraxis cry out, heard the murmur of the watching crowd, but he forced himself to focus on breathing, on surviving each moment as it came. Minutes passed that felt like hours. Marcus could feel his strength fading, his heartbeat becoming irregular as the device took more than his body could safely give. This was it, he realized with a strange calm. This was how it ended. And then everything changed. A commotion erupted in the observation gallery. Shouts and the sounds of combat echoing through the chamber. The extractor suddenly stopped, and Marcus opened his eyes to see Cyraxis standing at its controls, her hands moving across the interface with desperate speed. What are you doing? The chief technician demanded. Saving him, Cyraxis replied. There is another way. An ancient technique forbidden by tradition, but not by law. She looked up at the gallery, where Curvath was struggling against guards who had suddenly turned against him. Did you think I would not discover your sabotage, Lord Curvath? Did you think the workers you bribed would stay silent when offered protection? Curvath snarled and broke free from his captors, leaping from the gallery with a warrior's grace and landing in the chamber with a crystal blade already drawn. Then I will do what must be done myself. The queen has gone mad, and the alien must die. He charged toward Marcus, who was too weak to even raise his head from the slab. But Cyraxis was faster. She moved between them with a speed that belied her age, catching Curvath's blade arm and twisting with enough force to crack his carapace. The Hive Lord screamed in pain and rage. But Cyraxis did not stop. 3,000 years of combat experience flowed through her movements as she dismantled Curvath's attack with surgical precision, breaking his guard and driving him to his knees in a matter of seconds. You forget, she said quietly, standing over his crumpled form, that I was a warrior before I was a queen. I have killed more enemies than you have ever met, and I will not hesitate to add you to that number. She pressed her foot against his throat. Yield. Curvath looked up at her with hatred burning in his compound eyes. But he had no choice. I yield. He spat. Guards rushed forward to take him into custody, while Cyraxis turned back to Marcus. The technique I mentioned, she said, moving to his side. It requires me to bond part of my own life force to yours. It will save your life, but it will cost me, perhaps centuries of my existence. Marcus tried to speak, to object, but he was too weak. Do not argue, Syraxis said. Taking his hand, I have lived 3,000 years and felt nothing. I would rather live 300 with you than face eternity alone again. She closed her eyes and began to chant in the ancient Volanthi tongue. Marcus felt warmth spreading from their joined hands, chasing away the cold weakness that had gripped him. It was like sunlight after a long winter, like coming home after years of wandering. The sensation grew more intense, and Marcus saw light flowing between them, saw the years transferring from her body to his. He saw 3,000 years of memory and experience and loneliness, saw the weight she had carried alone for so long, and he saw himself through her eyes, saw the hope he had brought, the laughter, the reminder that life could be more than duty and decline. The light faded, and Marcus drew a deep breath that filled his lungs completely. For the first time since the procedure began, Syraxis swayed, suddenly appearing older somehow, though her features remained unchanged. It is done, she said softly. We are bonded now, for however long we both shall live. The coup collapsed within hours, with Curvath in custody and the truth of his sabotage revealed. The other Hive Lords quickly distanced themselves from his faction, some out of genuine outrage at his treachery, others out of simple political survival instinct. The common Volanthi, who had been watching events unfold through palace broadcasts, flooded the streets in celebration. Their queen had found someone worth fighting for, someone who had been willing to die for their future. That meant something to people who had lived so long without hope. The genetic tests from the extractor came back positive beyond anyone's expectations. Marcus's DNA was not just compatible with Volanthi genetic structure, it was almost perfectly complementary, as if nature itself had designed them to fit together within weeks. The first hybrid embryos were developing in the royal nurseries. Strong embryos, viable embryos, embryos that showed none of the degradation that had plagued pure Volanthi clones for generations. Syraxis wept when she saw them, great clicking sobs that shook her entire body. 3,000 years, she whispered. 3,000 years of watching my people die slowly. And now, she could not finish, but she did not need to. Marcus held her as she cried. This ancient queen who had finally found a reason to believe in tomorrow. The wedding ceremony was unlike anything in Volanthi history. Elements of human tradition were woven together with ancient Volanthi rites, creating something new that honored both species. Marcus wore a uniform of deep blue that matched the color of Syraxis's carapace, while she wore robes of white and gold that flowed like water around her form. The entire empire watched as their queen and her human prince exchanged vows, binding themselves together in the sight of gods both alien and familiar. When the ceremony ended, Syraxis leaned close to Marcus and made her clicking laugh. You know, she murmured, you never actually answered my question properly. Back when we first met, Marcus smiled, remembering that moment in the throne room that seemed both forever ago and only yesterday. You asked if I was single, and you said yes. But that was not truly an answer. It was merely a statement of fact. She touched his face with gentle hands. So let me ask again. Now that you know what I am and what I offer, Marcus Cole of Earth, are you single? Marcus looked at her, at this impossible being who had saved his life and stolen his heart, at the Queen of 13 Worlds who had given up centuries of her existence so that he might live. Not anymore, he said. Never again. 3 months later, ambassadors from Earth finally arrived, their diplomatic vessel dropping out of jump space to find a human distress beacon on a world that should have been uncharted. They were met by a delegation that included Volanthi nobles, hybrid guards, and one very familiar face, Commander Cole. The lead ambassador stammered, We thought you were dead. I am very much alive, Marcus said. And I have someone I would like you to meet. Syraxis stepped forward, every inch the regal queen, and extended her hand in the human fashion she had learned. I am Queen Syraxis of the Volanthi Imperium, and I believe we have much to discuss regarding the future relationship between our peoples. The ambassador stared at Marcus with undisguised shock. What exactly happened here, Commander? Marcus smiled, putting his arm around the waist of the most powerful being in this sector of the galaxy. She asked if I was single. I said yes. Things escalated. Syraxis made her clicking laugh, the sound that Marcus had come to love more than any other. He was the first being in 3,000 years brave enough to tell me I was wrong about something. She added, how could I not keep him? The ambassador opened and closed his mouth several times before giving up on speech entirely. Marcus did not blame him. It was a lot to take in, but as he stood there with his queen, looking out at a future that held more promise than he had ever dared imagine, Marcus Cole knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was exactly where he was meant to be, not just as a survivor or a diplomat or even as a prince, but as a partner to someone who had waited 3,000 years to find him, and he was never letting go.